The Bible tells us in Luke chapter 2, beginning in verse 41, it says, "Now his parents," that's Jesus' parents, "went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. And when they had fulfilled the days, as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinsfolk and acquaintance. And when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem, seeking him." Now, it's very interesting in this text to note that the Bible starts off with the fact that they went to Jerusalem every year at the Feast of the Passover. So here we have a situation of attending something on a customary basis, right? This was a tradition. And because of this tradition, you would expect, right, that as they're going to the Passover, which is reminding them of the Messiah, of the spiritual deliverance that God is going to provide for his people and eventually for the world, that because these are the parents of Jesus, that they would have been sensitive to how important it was for Christ to go to Passover. But the verse says in verse 42 that when Jesus was 12 years old, he went up with them according to the custom of the feast. And it says when the days were fulfilled and the feast of unleavened bread and everything had passed over, it says they returned, and the child Jesus, he tarried behind in Jerusalem. You see, the first point here is to note the fact that sometimes when we're going through spiritual events, a prayer meeting, a Bible study, the Holy Sabbath, whatever it is, sometimes when we're ready to go out bowling or go kick it with our friends or ready to catch our favorite TV show or watch that sports game, Jesus is tarrying behind. Even though the event is over, Christ is still there, waiting and wanting to meet and to discuss the things of God. It is important for us to recognize that sometimes guarding the edges of the Sabbath, sometimes guarding the edges of religious events are like, just because the event is over doesn't mean the opportunity for an encounter with Jesus has passed us by. But it goes even further to say that they, as Jesus tarried behind, Joseph and his mother, they knew not of it, that Jesus stayed behind. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey. Now, I want you to notice the text says that they, supposing him to have been in the company. Now, this is important because when you think about the fact that why would they assume that Jesus was there? How come it doesn't say, but they knew that he wasn't there? The reason is that Mary and Joseph got in their caravan with their friends and their acquaintances, and they started just heading home. And of course, the thought crossed the mind, oh yeah, Jesus is probably here with us. So here's the point. They didn't see Jesus. They didn't talk to Jesus. They had not personally touched him and saw him with their own eyes. And so because of that, they assumed because they had not seen. But here is the problem in the text that is critical for you and I to understand. When we have not seen Jesus, when we have not been in our Bibles, when we have not been with Christ in the secret place of prayer, and yet we assume that the Lord is with us. We decide to go to work, we decide to go to class, we decide to go to the meetings in the morning, and we just suppose that Jesus is with us. But how dangerous is it an idea that we go to something assuming that Jesus is with us, but he is not with us? So what am I telling you? Don't ever assume that Jesus is with you unless you have seen him with your own eyes, unless you have bowed in his presence that morning, unless you have spoken to him in prayer, unless you have opened his word in communion with him. Do not assume that Jesus is with you. That is not the kind of spiritual life that you and I want to live. God wants us to know that Jesus is with us because we have seen him. May the Lord help us that as we live our lives each and every day would not be based on the assumption of God's presence, but on the personal conviction that he is with us.